Namaste. Today making a video about post-prison PTSD. This time last year I was on remand in Wandsworth Prison here in London after being arrested twice within 1 week and then being kept on remand in the prison until my court date a month later. And I've lived a life up until getting arrested and being in prison which was relatively normal, relatively sane, relatively privileged, relatively comfortable, relatively sheltered. It wasn't that I grew up in crime or on the streets or anything like that. And so I went through 30 years of my life living that way. And so at 30 to then be arrested twice and to be subsequently remanded for a month in one of England's worst performing prisons was a real shock and a real eye-opener for me. And it's left me with this PTSD from kind of the shock and being in there and the things experienced. And so now it's coming up to a year later and I'm now sober and I'm completing my community service, all my probation. I've gone through the courts, I've paid my fines, and it's still kind of playing out through my system. So I wanted to make a video about that, to document that, to show where I am at this place, and to plant those seeds for my future self, for growing and developing and integrating this experience. So this time last year, it was kind of coming to the end of a really slippery slope and challenging time for my mental health, which I'd been going through, on and off for about a year or more, maybe up to a year and a half. But it was the first time that I would kind of self-diagnose that I had a complete psychotic break. So during this time I did some crazy shit, and it resulted in 2 arrests in a week, basically like damaging property, assaulting an emergency worker, having like drugs on me, driving in a very reckless and intoxicated way. And so, rightfully arrested both occasions and sent down for a month in Wandsworth. And, in hindsight, I wasn't, fit and healthy, mentally stable at that time. And yet, kind of what did the system know? So they just sent me down to jail. Yeah, in hindsight, some psychiatrist, mental health professional probably should have checked me out, probably should have recognized that I wasn't doing okay, and maybe kind of some other measures should have been put in place, but that wasn't the case. And by the time I did actually have a full assessment in prison in my last week of being on remand, all of the kind of symptoms and however erratic I was and all of that, they kind of subsided. I was also able to kind of hold it together at that point, even if I still wasn't completely back to my normal self. So yeah, so it's not that they just completely ignored all the signs and symptoms and whatnot. But anyway, yeah, I spent a month there, and for, for the most part, I was able to do pretty well, I was able to take care of myself, manage myself, not get in too much trouble, not get completely taken the piss out of, manage to stand on my own 2 feet. And I would say in that environment, even though it was tough and challenging, I definitely swam and I didn't sink. And so in many ways it's made me strong, it's made me more of a man, whatever that means. And it's helped me to find a center and a backbone in many respects. And yet, it was such a shock to be in that environment, and especially to kind of be in like a troublesome, unstable state of mind. And yeah, of course I got in some fights there, verbally, physically, and that's always kind of fucked, because what can you do? You fight back, you stick up for yourself, but at the end of the day, it's in those confines, in that environment, around those kind of people, it's like hella traumatic. The way people treat you there, the way the guards kind of disrespect, the way other prisoners relate to you. I suppose this is different if people have grown up in crime, grown up in those environments, but I hadn't, I went to a top UK private school and was kind of, from a young age, fast-tracked through that route. Since then, had spent times at various healing centres and ceremonial spaces and spiritual places all around the world, so by the time I arrived there, it was like a completely different environment. And yeah, the way people treat each other, the way the whole social game is played there is like really tough, really challenging. Also, like my own kind of, I call it psychosis, even though it was undiagnosed, like I've mentioned, but the way I was kind of paranoid and always on the edge, always on lookout, always kind of thinking the worst. And that kind of prevented me from really connecting with people in there, really kind of, I don't know if it's possible to build deep, fulfilling, meaningful, nurturing relationships. But yeah, I feel like I didn't do that, and it was challenging to be a month in that environment, constantly alert and constantly ears pricked and eyes, engaged, and the whole nervous system, responding to that. Being in cells with people that are, kind of rough or fucked up or not nice company, being practically starved there, because I didn't know people, so I wasn't on the pecking order for getting, big portions of food, and I moved around quite a lot because, there was bits and bobs happening, trouble happening, and because of just capacity in the prison. So I didn't always get my canteen when I was there. So that was, difficult. And yeah, so all of these things, and, it might not sound like much, but it was just such a shock, such at other end of the spectrum from everything else that I'd experienced. And I was, mentally unstable, mentally unwell at the time. So that residual was definitely like left in my system. And so now that I'm doing probation once a month, community service every week, I'm being kind of reminded of that, the people I'm meeting in probation or community service are also reminding me of that, and it's just like so triggering. It's highlighting so much stuff. It's highlighting how far I've come from where I was when I was in all of that, but it's also at the same time highlighting where in many ways I'm still at, because I'm still like processing and reliving and having flashbacks, and my body is, reacting to all of those things, every week when they come up, or when I go to probation every month. And yeah, I'm sober now, like 8 months. I haven't gotten any trouble since. I've had my tag on my leg, it's now come off, I've paid my fines. I'm just finishing up my community service hours and completing my probation contract. So, I'm definitely working through and processing. But yeah, the residual's still very much there, and it's still strong.